Starting on page 77. French and Indian War just ended. Who won? Yeah, Britain won. British Army. And who helped them? Yeah, we did. Colonial militia, right? We're loyal Englishmen. They were at war. And who'd we beat? Who lost the war? French and Indians. That's why we named it French and Indian War, right? So the British Army and us colonial militia fought side by side and defeated the French Army and the Indians. Now the big question, and what was the result? What were we fighting over? What is the fact that we won? What does that mean? The whole point of fighting the war. What were they fighting over?
Land, like the land between the two, French and Britain.
Okay, the disputed land, right? They were fighting over the disputed land. Now, do your best. Describe that land. Where is it? If you had to describe it, not point at it, but describe it, how would you describe that? The land that Britain won from the French as a result of the French and Indian War. Kateri?
It was between the Mississippi and Appalachian Mountains.
Exactly right. The land between the Mississippi River, which would have been the edge of my map here, and the Appalachian Mountains, which is right here. So all this land, that would be west of the mountains, east of the river, is now all part of what country?
England.
England. We already knew the coast here where the colonies were was England, but now it's England all the way past the mountains, all the way out to the Mississippi River. Why? Because they won the French and Indian War. Now look at today's subheading on page 77. Conflict over new British policies. All right, we're going to see the beginning of a major conflict, a major confrontation between the colonists and our own government, the British government. You guys have a pass?
No, I
I
forgot
lost
mine.
mine. I saw you again.
I forgot my books and my phone locker.
First.
Well, you're both late, so you can't come in here without a pass. So I'm gonna give you OWs. You know, that bell schedule, that applies to everybody, not just the people that aren't forgetful. That even applies to the people that are forgetful. I don't like interruptions, especially needless ones. You guys understand me?
Yes, sir.
The subheading on page 77 says a conflict over new British policies. There's gonna be some new laws by the British government that the colonists don't like. Now, remember, this is England, part of Britain, so the laws that Britain passes, these colonists have to follow, but it doesn't mean they have to like them, right? It's gonna cause a conflict. So before we get any further, let me explain how the British government worked in those days, kind of the same way it works today. There's two parts of it. There's whoever's on the throne at the time, the king or the queen or whatever. Obviously, they had some power. In those days, the king had more power than the queen has today. The queen's more or less a figurehead nowadays, not a lot of power. But in those days, it was different. And the king at the time was King George III, kind of a young man, new king, had just recently taken the throne. I don't know if any of you have seen Hamilton, that musical Hamilton. Raise your hand if you've seen that. I'm not a big fan of that kind of music, but I do like history. All right, so my daughter forced me to watch it this summer, and I like the story. Maybe not the music, but I like the story, and I kind of like the way that they portrayed King George III. Right, in the movie of the musical is portrayed kind of as a, I don't know, kind of a sissy boy or whatever, and that's kind of, from what I know of history, kind of the way he was. But anyway, he's the new king, he had some power. Well, the other part of the British government was what they call the Parliament. Still what they call it today. Parliament is England's version of representative government. We've mentioned that before. Representative government means that the people of a country or a community choose someone to be their representative, and they go and help in a big group. They make decisions on behalf of everyone. So some examples of that, and we said that's one of the pillars of American greatness, is we strongly believe in representative government for that. That way the people get a say in the laws that are passed. Alright, so for example, your 8th grade student senate, that's representative government, right? All of you had a chance to elect somebody to go to the student senate meetings and make decisions on your behalf. They represent you. Alright, last week, in our Republican Club meeting, we had Spencer Roach. He's a man that's a representative in Tallahassee, Florida. He lives here in Southwest Florida, and he's our representative, our voice, so to speak, up in Tallahassee. So whenever they have to decide on laws that people in Florida have to follow, Spencer Roach casts a vote, yes or no. Right? He's our representative. On a national level, our nation's capital up in Washington, D.C. Come November 3rd, we're gonna get a new representative. I'll predict who's gonna win, I know I'm right. It's gonna be Byron Donalds. He just won a primary a couple of weeks ago. I'm gonna vote for him. A bunch of Southwest Florida voters are gonna vote for him on November 3rd, so then he's gonna go to Washington, D.C. And when they make decisions or laws that everybody in America has to follow, he's gonna be our representative. He'll vote yes or no, right? That's our voice to our nation's capital. That's representative government. We always have a say. That's one of the great things about America. Well, guess what? England had that too. Theirs isn't called a Congress though. Theirs was called a Parliament. Still is. Now, that we understand how the British government worked, there was a king who was not elected, right? He just ascends to the throne. And Parliament, people who are elected. Now let's look at page 77 under conflict over the new British policies, second paragraph, first sentence. Parliament decided that the colonies had been allowed too much, what? Freedom. Too much freedom. Wait a minute. What are we all about in America today? Freedom. All those colonists that started those 13 colonies, why did they go through all those hardships? Freedom. Most of them were religious freedom, right? But I'm sure economic freedom, political freedom. But they were all about freedom. Much like we are today. And they're like, wait, Parliament thinks we have too much freedom? See, Parliament starts to try to take that freedom away from the colonists. No wonder there's about to be a conflict, right? That explains the subheading. We're all about freedom. They're trying to take it away. By the way, someone who tries to take away freedom is called a tyrant. The taking away of freedom is called tyranny. Parliament we're going to see, going to try to be a tyrant. So is King George III before it's over. They're going to be proved to be tyrants to the colonists. And it's all going to start here. So Parliament passes laws. We're going to put up a timeline over here on the board, and we're going to add to it all week long. All right, and you'll notice as the years tick by, it'll go farther and farther through the timeline, and we're going to add more laws, and not all laws, some of them will be events, and by the end of the week, you're going to be spitting mad. You're going to understand why the colonists were so mad. You'll start getting annoyed even today. All right, so the first law Parliament passed is the Proclamation of 1763. All right, now check on page 80. Nope, it's on page 78, my bad. Page 78. What did the proclamation of 1763 do? What did it say? Made something illegal. Ethan?
It colonists go west of the Appalachian.
Couldn't do what?
Go west.
Couldn't move west of the Appalachian Mountains. Whoa, time out. Whose land is that west of the Appalachian Mountains?
England.
It's England's land. How do we know? We just won the war. Alright, next question. When did this French and Indian War end? We covered that last week. What was the last battle, the last year of the French and Indian War? Who remembers? Look it up if you have to. When did the French and Indian War end? Two?
1763.
1763. Look at this law. The Proclamation of 1763. The war just ended, and as soon as the war ends, one of the first things Parliament does is make a law says you can't move west of the mountains. At first we weren't mad. At first the colonists were just confused, like, wait, we can't go where? West of the mountains. Well, that's our land. Yeah, but you can't go there, it's against the law. We're like, hey, Parliament, newsflash, maybe you need to read the paper. We won the war, hello? It was a long bloody war, right? We won. That's our land now. Parliament says, yeah, I know, but you can't go there. Does this make any sense to you? It's kind of confusing, right? The colonists are confused. Well, they're like, why not? The British government's like, well, it's for your own safety. We're like, safety? The French soldiers, they're gone. They went back to Europe. What are you worried about? Well, like Indians over there. Yeah, well, I'll take my chances, right? There's a word for that. That's called freedom. The colonists are like, I'm aware there might still be Indians, but we're not at war anymore, and I'll take my chances. It's a rough country. I don't need you to babysit me. Right? Besides, we fought side by side with the British Army. The militia did, didn't we? Fought side by side with them. So let's say I was a militiaman, and maybe I sacrificed a lot. Maybe I lost a son in the war. Maybe I had one of my eyes shot out. Maybe I had one of my legs shot off or whatever. I paid a big price, right? All for the chance to move west of the mountains. But now my own government's telling me I can't? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, even today we like freedom, right? Now, there are things that I might not be interested in doing, but I'm glad that people have the freedom to do them. And if I ever wanted to do them, I would like to know that I had the freedom. Maybe like starting a business. Maybe some of your parents started a business and owned their own business. My dad was that way. He was always starting businesses. I'm not that way. I've never wanted to. But I kind of like to know I had the freedom if I changed my mind. Wouldn't that be nice, right? And I sure am glad that other people have the freedom too. So most colonists were not, my point is, most of them were not planning on moving west of the mountains anyway. It is harsh territory. It's still a frontier. There are still some dangers out there. But it was nice to know that they had earned the freedom to do that by winning the war. But now, their own government is taking away that freedom. That's annoying. It's confusing.
Like sometimes there's something I don't want to do, then my dad tell me I can't do it, and then I'll go and do it.
Exactly. Now all of a sudden you want to when they tell you you can't, right? I know, we're kind of that way. All right, and that's a good example. So the colonists, confused by this new law, kind of annoyed by this new law, but here's the thing about a law. A law isn't really mean anything unless there's somebody to enforce it, right? So here's a new thing I need to tell you. In order to enforce this law, the British government left a bunch of British soldiers in the colonies, even though the French and Indian War was over. Remember, these soldiers were on our side, right? We fought side by side with the British soldiers. And now the war's over and the British soldiers are still hanging out in our towns. And we're like, hey, why are all these British soldiers here? And the government was like, well, that's to keep you safe. Like, keep us safe. Safe from what? The war's over. French soldiers are gone home. Well, to keep you safe from Indians. I'm like, oh, I get it. Keep us safe from the Indians west of the mountains, you know, where we're not allowed to go. But the soldiers aren't west of the mountains. The soldiers are in our towns on the coast, like Boston. Last I checked, there weren't any Indians running up and down the streets of Boston, but that's where the soldiers are to keep us safe. And it wasn't long until us colonists, we figured out, these soldiers aren't here to keep us safe. What are they really here for?
Enforce the law.
To enforce these stupid laws they're passing. Alright, to make sure, kind of keep us under their thumb, to keep an eye on us, and we figured that out. So very early on, the colonists started resenting the British soldiers, who they used to be on their side back in the French and Indian War. And now all of a sudden they're here like acting like policemen, enforcing these tyrannical laws. Well, it doesn't stop there. 2 years later, Parliament acts again and makes another law. Look up here. We call that the Quartering Act of 1765. Act means law. Always remember that. So quartering, as in living quarters. Like different uses for the word quarter, right? But here we're talking about living quarters. Get what this law says. This might make you a little annoyed. This law says that since Britain is going to have these soldiers over here to, quote unquote, keep us safe, they're going to need a place to live. So, the Quartering Act requires you, as a colonist, to provide living quarters if you have any unoccupied buildings on your property. So you, sir, you have this barn out back? Well, here's 4 British soldiers. I want you to let them live in that barn. And he might be like, well, no, wait, I was going to shut up. These 4 soldiers are going to live there.
Did they have to feed them?
And you got that shed? I don't care what you're using it for, clear it out, because here's 2 British soldiers going to live on your property in that shed. And yes, Ethan, you got to buy their groceries too, because they got to eat. So you got to give them a place to live and food to eat, all at your expense. It's now the law. It's called the Quartering Act of 1765. And the British government's, well, it's all for your own good, you know, for your own safety. They're here, you should pay for them. Well, I got an idea. Since the war's over, why don't you just send the British soldiers home? Then we don't need to pay for them, and then we can move west of the mountains. Like, no, you have too much freedom. No moving west of the mountains. And to make sure you don't, we're going to leave these soldiers here. And you got to give them a place to live. Getting annoyed? Yeah, I'm starting to get angry. Can you see why the colonists were getting angry? It's going to get worse. Yeah.
Why couldn't you just blow the British, why couldn't you just shoot them?
Well,
And they're
because
safe
they
from
got the weapons, they got the guns, and besides, it's our own country. That would be like you asking me, why don't we just shoot the U.S. Army or the community police officers or whatever? All right, well, we can't. They're on our side, right? They're supposed to be keeping us safe. But they weren't really keeping us safe. They were keeping an eye on us. But
Or tie them
stay
up.
tuned, because our timeline's not done yet. Our timeline's not done yet. Eventually, we will get to that point, Natalie. That's the whole point where we're going, right? Not yet in 1765, though. But wait about 10 years, that's where we're gonna get to. Good question. All right, well, it doesn't stop with the Quartering Act. It gets worse. Besides these soldiers living here, they gotta get paid a salary. So the Parliament decided to raise money to pay the soldiers by charging us a tax. Now, I can't assume you know what a tax is. You probably do. I'm not sure I did in 8th grade. So let's make sure we all understand what a tax is. A tax is money that goes from us to who?
The government.
The government. See, the government doesn't make anything. We make everything. We create all the wealth. The people do. And then from that wealth that we created, the government taxes us. Right? We all get that. Nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody I know, at least. I don't like paying taxes, but I get it. It's part of the responsibility. You gotta pay your government the taxes that they require. Well, in 1765, Parliament acted again with the Stamp Act. What's an act?
A law.
A law. Same year, 1765, Stamp Act. This is a tax. Stamp Act is a tax. Now, it's a tax on certain things. Whenever you had a business transaction, like on your bill of sale, your receipt, you would have to get a stamp. I know we don't use old-fashioned mail very often, but I think y'all still know what a stamp is that you would lick and put on an envelope.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that kind of stamp exactly. It's more like the kind where you would dip it in ink and then stamp the form official, right? It's stamped. Alright, so the stamp looked something like this. I'll put it up on the screen. And every time you would buy something that required this stamp, you would have to get the stamp put on the document, and you would have to pay the tax. Kind of a creepy looking stamp, but that's not the point. The point is, it's a tax. Alright, it wasn't even a very large tax, but still, it's a tax that the colonists have to pay. And the colonists didn't like this. For one very good reason. They didn't like this tax. They started protesting. They started chanting slogans. Do we see protesters?
Yep.
In the street with signs and chanting? We see that all summer long, right? Get kind of tired of it. And we're not talking about rioters. Rioters are criminals. They have no right to do that. But people do have a right to protest. We all have a right to our opinion and to express that opinion. Nothing wrong with that. And the colonists started protesting. But they weren't saying no justice, no peace, or whatever, like some of them are today. Their chant was this. The colonists' rallying cry was no taxation without representation. Now I gotta explain that. That's a mouthful though. No taxation without representation. Here's what that means. Remember we talked about representative government. Right? We have representatives in 8th grade make decisions on your behalf. Spencer Roach goes to Tallahassee. He's our representative. All right? He helps them make decisions on our behalf. Byron Donalds, after November, will go up to Washington, D.C. He'll be our representative. Make decisions on our behalf. We have representation. Guess what the colonists did not have in Parliament?
Representation.
They had no representation. See, Parliament was representative government for the part of England over in Europe. Right? So every community in Europe had a representative to Parliament. Every community in England in Europe. So Nottingham had a representative. Birmingham had a representative. Lissingham and Nottingham. Seems like every town's a ham over there in England. But whatever. Every community had a representative. But not in the colonies. We didn't have representatives in Parliament because we didn't need them. We didn't even want one. Because every one of the 13 colonies had developed their own representative governments by this time. We even learned about the very, very first one ever in the New World was the Virginia House of Burgesses, remember? The first representative government in the New World. Well, and the House of Burgesses made laws that people in Virginia colony had to follow. And Pennsylvania had their own representative government that made laws that just the Pennsylvania colony had to follow. And same with New York and Massachusetts and all 13 colonies. So we didn't have representation in Parliament. We didn't even want representation in Parliament. But since we don't have any representation, We didn't feel like they had the right to tax us. I like to put it this way. Everybody in America should get their say. So like come November 3rd, we're gonna have elections, right? Presidential election, congressional elections, all kinds of elections. Everybody gets their say, right? Assuming you're old enough and everything, and assuming you're a US citizen. Obviously, if you're not an American, you don't get any say in how we run America. But if you are an American, you get your say. Is it possible that everybody's gonna get their way?
Mm-mm.
No. There's no way everybody's gonna get their way. That's not even possible in your 8th grade Senate when they make spirit shirts or whatever, they pick colors and designs. Not everybody's gonna be happy. Everybody can't get their way, but everybody did get their say. Back last spring, when you voted on representatives, student senators, that's when you got your say. So November 3rd, everybody gets their say. That's the importance of making sure that elections are fair. Because if somebody has a right to vote and they're not allowed to vote, is that fair?
Mm-mm.
No. Every person gets their say. On the other hand, if somebody votes more than once, is that fair?
Mm-mm.
No. One person, one vote. Everybody should get their say. Nobody gets more say than another person. That wouldn't be fair. Alright, so everybody gets their say. Of course, not everybody will get their way. And that's okay. Alright, trying too hard to rhyme here. But as long as everybody gets their say, we're okay with that. But did the colonists have any say in Parliament?
Nope.
Nope, they had no representation, so their rallying cry is then we shouldn't have to pay. We have no say, we don't have to pay. No taxation without representation, say it.
No taxation without representation.
Kinda got a little cadence to it, rolls off your tongue, I like it. But, now you gotta say it like you mean, put your eyebrows down, and then say it.
No
representation.
No, you got it backwards.
No taxation without representation.
That's it, no taxation without representation, it just isn't fair. And Parliament was saying, shut up, you bunch of whiny colonists. You're just upset because you didn't get your way. And we're like, no, 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 that's not true. We're not upset because we didn't get our way, we're upset because we didn't get our say. We don't have any representation. And since we didn't get any say, we don't think we should have to pay. We're not asking you for representation in Parliament. We don't want it. We have our own representative governments. Parliaments for the people that live in England over in Europe. We have our own representative governments here in this part of England. We don't need Parliament, which means we also don't have to follow their laws. And Parliament says, you bunch of whining little colonists. This is why we gotta take away your freedom, because you think you have all this freedom. So stop whining and pay the tax. Besides, it's such a tiny amount. That Stamp Act is just a few pennies. Quit crying about it and just pay it. It's no big deal. And we're like, you're missing the point. We understand it's not much money. That's not the point. This is the point. It's the principle of the thing. No taxation without representation. In order to have freedom, that's what we mean by representative government, is one of the foundational great things about America. It's one of the pillars of our greatness. Without representation, representative government, you don't have freedom. If you don't have a say in your own government, then you're not free. So you're missing the point, Parliament. We don't care how small the tax is. The point is, we didn't have a say in it, so we shouldn't have to pay. What do you think, Parliament agreed?
Nope.
No. Well, it's the law, so pay. Well, we didn't like that. So, we decided to get together and have a meeting, decide what to do. Now, this is historic. Look on page 80. Nowadays, we know our country's called the United States of America. We have 50 states united as into one country. Obviously, it started as 13 united into one country, right? But not yet. At this time, it wasn't the 13 united colonies. It was the 13 separate English colonies. They were not united in any way. In other words, Massachusetts had nothing to do with New York, which had nothing to do with Pennsylvania, which had nothing to do with Virginia, and so on. 13 separate English colonies. The only thing they had in common is they're all English colonies, but they weren't in any way united. And we realized, complaining as one colony might not get us very far. Maybe we should unite, get together, and in one voice tell the British government what we're unhappy about. So we decided to do just that. It's called the Stamp Act Congress. You'll see it on page 80. Congress is just a fancy word for meeting. Where did the Stamp Act Congress take place? Where was that meeting?
Massachusetts?
No, it wasn't in Massachusetts.
New York?
It's in New York City. So here's New York City on my map. There's 13 colonies, only 9 of them sent delegates and representatives. Probably because of the distance and difficulty in traveling. The southern colonies, that was a long way. So we didn't get all 13, but 9 out of 13 is not bad, right? So 9 of the colonies get together in New York City and say, what are we gonna do about these stupid laws? Proclamation of 1763, the Quartering Act, the Stamp Act. What are we gonna do about these? Well, one of the things we decided to do was to petition the king. Petition is just a fancy word to write him a letter. We're gonna write the king a letter. So here's basically what it said. Now, obviously, I'm paraphrasing this, but this was the main message in the meeting. We wrote him a letter. We said, Dear King George III, we are colonists here in the New World, and we are your loyal subjects. We are proud to be Englishmen. And you are the man. You are the King of England, which means you are our king, and we have no problem with that, because this is part of your kingdom. We're subject to you. We're your loyal subjects. We love England. But, King George, it's Parliament that's annoying us. They're passing these laws, they're charging us taxes, and we don't even have a representative in Parliament. So could you please get Parliament off our back? You're our boss, but they're not. Yours truly, the colonists. King George III didn't even reply. How disrespectful is that? I mean, he could have said, thanks for your concern, I'll look into it. At least say that, right? But he didn't. He could have even said, I'm on Parliament's side on this one, pay your taxes. I mean, we wouldn't have liked that answer, but at least he would have had enough respect to have given us an answer. He didn't even answer us. So there's our first clue. King George III thinks of us as second-class Englishmen. He doesn't even have enough respect to reply to our kind letter that we sent him. I wonder if he got it. We weren't even sure he read it, because certainly he would be nice enough to give us some kind of a reply, because were we rude in that letter?
No.
No. We let him know that he's our boss. He didn't even reply. We knew that didn't work. So plan B. So well then, we're going to organize a boycott. What's a boycott? We still do those sometimes today. What is a boycott? Kind of an interesting topic. We'll spend a little time talking about boycotts. Ethan?
That's like when you don't show up to something, you're not gonna do it.
Yeah, you refuse to participate, you don't show up, or you refuse to buy it, or you refuse to shop there, or you refuse to do business with a certain business or whatever. You boycott. Alright, so just kind of help you understand boycotts. We've seen a bunch of them lately, even this year. I always get a kick out of them because sometimes they work, but not always. All right, a few years ago, a bunch of people tried to boycott Chick-fil-A because of a stance they took on marriage. All right, well, then all the people who agreed with Chick-fil-A's stance set a record. That was still to this day Chick-fil-A's biggest #1 day in sales, the day they were boycotted. So obviously that boycott didn't work, right? Just this summer, Goya Foods, I think they make Mexican, they can't have Mexican canned food. I guess the president or whatever of that company supported President Trump in some way or another. So the people who don't like Trump decided to organize a boycott of Goya Foods. And ever since then, Goya has sold more cans of food than ever before because of Trump supporters' support. So that boycott didn't work. Sometimes they don't work, they backfire. Personally, I've seen like I'm always boycotting everybody, everything. My family makes fun of me because, you know, I get angry and I say, I'm not going there anymore, I'm gonna boycott them. All right, and they just make fun of me because I'm running out of places to go. All right, because everybody makes me mad. All right, a few years ago, I decided I'm gonna boycott Target because of their bathroom policy. They started letting men go into women's bathrooms. I'm not going there anymore. And I like that store. I quit going to Target. I'll go to Publix where shopping is a pleasure. All right. Dick's was my favorite sporting goods store, my go-to store. They had all kinds of stuff I liked to buy. I went there a lot whenever I needed something. A couple of years ago, they changed the policy on how they deal with gun sales, which I didn't like. So that does it. I'm boycotting Dick's. I gotta find somewhere else to go now.
Amazon.
Do you think Dick's Sporting Goods had to close down because Mr. Kiefer doesn't shop there anymore? No.
I boycotted the NBA.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. When one person boycotts, it's not that. That's not really a boycott. You gotta get a bunch of people to make it effective, right? My biggest boycott, Nike. All right, I boycotted Nike. That was my go-to brand. Even before I was your age, I don't think I ever had another brand of tennis shoes or athletic shoes. It was always Nike. I knew which sizes, I liked the way they looked, I liked the way they fit. I was Nike through and through I must have had hundreds and hundreds of pairs of Nikes in my life. Until a few years ago, the NFL started doing the kneeling at the national anthem. It was Colin Kaepernick, you might have heard about him. And he's my least favorite American currently. And I found that unpatriotic. It offended me. I understand free speech, they can do it, but I don't have to like it, right? Well, that's all fine until Nike hired Colin Kaepernick as their spokesman. They did a whole big ad campaign and featured Colin Kaepernick. So I said, all right, I'm boycotting Nike. No more Nikes from now on. But the crazy thing was, I had just bought or ordered a brand new set of ECS baseball uniforms from Nike. Because at that time, ECS was a Nike school, like we're an Under Armour school now. And 2 weeks after I ordered the uniforms, the Colin Kaepernick announcement came out. And I called my salesman and I said, cancel those uniforms. They're from Nike, I don't want them. And he said, can't. The order's already been sent out and they're being made in Vietnam or wherever, I don't even know. And I said, well then you better call Vietnam, because I don't want it. I'm boycotting. Long story short, they finally agreed to, as long as I would order another set of uniforms from that salesman, which I did, different brand. I didn't like them as much, but at least they weren't Nike.
What brand?
New Balance.
Yeah, there you go, New Balance. Funny enough, they would let me order any brand except Under Armour, because Under Armour is Nike's big competitor. But anyway, then a year later, so this was out this summer, but the summer before, 2019 summer, Nike came out with a new shoe, a patriotic shoe. It had the old Betsy Ross flag on, the original US flag. Like we have 50 stars, their shoe had a flag on it that had the 13 stars in a circle. And I thought, oh, finally, Nike's doing something patriotic. Maybe I will buy some Nikes. But then their new spokesman, Colin Kaepernick, sent out a tweet and said, I don't like that shoe. So Nike canceled the shoe. They pulled it off the shelves and canceled it. They listened to Colin Kaepernick, my least favorite American. So I said, well, that does it. I'm not buying any more I'm still boycotting them, but see, that also pushed our headmaster, Dr. Hunt, over the edge. He canceled our contract with Nike, signed a contract with Under Armour, so that's why we're an Under Armour school today. Because they're unpatriotic. Dr. Hunt is patriotic, just like me. So we're boycotting Nike, but is Nike still in business? Of course, right? Just because Mr. Kiefer and ECS don't buy from them doesn't mean they don't have other customers. It takes more than one school or one person to make an effective boycott, right? Well, let's go back to colonial days. The colonists decided to boycott anything that required that stamp. They're gonna boycott anything about the Stamp Act. Remember, it's only a tax on certain things that require the stamp. So anything that required that stamp, we're not buying it. They might be able to force us to pay a tax, but can the government force you to buy something you don't want? Of course not. So we're just not gonna buy those things. See how much money you make from that tax. And since everybody in the colonies was involved, it was an organized boycott, it worked. That old saying, money talks. The British government realized they passed the tax in order to make money. But now nobody's paying the tax because they're not buying those things, which means not only are they not making money, but they have to enforce this law, which means it's costing them money. That was the whole point, was to make money for the British government instead of costing them money. So, good news. Parliament decided to repeal the Stamp Act. Repeal means cancel it, get rid of it. So, round of applause. The Stamp Act has been repealed. Come on, round of applause. Aren't you happy? That's one less tax colonists had to pay. But that doesn't mean problems are over. Repeat after me. The trouble is far from over.
The trouble is far from over.
You got that right. And sneak peek to tomorrow's lesson. Look at the subheading on page 81. It says the breach widens. A breach is a gap or the conflict between the colonists and the British government. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. This conflict is going to get worse before it gets better. Yes, the Stamp Act has been repealed. That's good, but the trouble is far from over. We're going to add to our list of laws and events on our timeline. Ethan?
England should have made every thing, food or everything have the